Awoken Wilderness, South Dakota's Black Elk Wilderness, Montana's Red Cedar Point, New Mexico's Lincoln National Forest, Arizona's Chuska Mountains, Washington's Gifford Pinchot and Mount Rainier, Idaho's Salmon Chalice, Wyoming's Shoshone, Oregon's Mount Hood and Deschutes, sprawls vast and untamed, a realm of towering pines, jagged granite peaks, and shadowed hollows where the air hums with the weight of forgotten centuries. For fire lookouts like Rhett Lair, Brennan Connolly, Clyde Mooney, Nolan Mercer, Callum Weaver, Everett Kane, Kian Margrave, Calvin Reese, Nash Winter, and Ethan Keller, these forests promised refuge. A sanctuary from shattered marriages, soul-crushing jobs, and the clamor of modern life. Perched in their creaky towers, they scanned for smoke, logged weather, and savored the solitude. Their only companions the wind's whisper and the distant calls of elk or coyotes. But beneath the stillness lurked something else. A presence, ancient and ravenous, that watched from the shadows, leaving behind bundles of bones, claw marks too deliberate for bears, and footprints defying nature's design. From Rhett's blood-soaked clearing to Ethan's tower under siege, their stories converge into a tapestry of dread. A tall, gaunt figure, sometimes pale and human-like with a twisted grin, sometimes monstrous with a gaping maw, hunting not just flesh but the primal terror pulsing beneath it. This is the chronicle of how the wilderness turned predator, how tangible evidence, shredded tents, blood-smeared earth, whispered legends, bears witness to a horror too real to bury, too vast to escape. The first whispers, a wilderness turned wrong. Rhett Lair was 32 in May 2017, a man hollowed out by a divorce that had stripped him of his savings and his trust in humanity. A desk job in Ohio, endless spreadsheets under flickering fluorescent lights, had drained his spirit, so he fled to the Black Elk Wilderness of South Dakota, where the air was crisp with pine and the silence offered a fragile peace. His fire tower, a weathered wooden skeleton perched on a hill, overlooked a sea of evergreens, its windows framing granite peaks that gleamed in the morning sun and valleys cloaked in shadow by dusk. The job was straightforward. Brew coffee strong enough to wake the dead, scan the horizon with binoculars for smoke, log wind shifts and temperature drops. The isolation was both a balm and a burden. He relished the quiet mornings watching elk herds drift through the valleys, their antlers catching the light, but the endless nights, too quiet, gnawed at him. After months, he'd grown accustomed to the rhythm. The creak of the tower's stairs in the wind, the faint hum of the radio, the rustle of leaves below. On a mid-morning in late June, the radio crackled to life, Terry's voice cutting through from Custer. Campers 6 miles south had reported strange sounds. Screaming, arguing, overnight, but found no one when they investigated. Probably kids messing around, Terry said. Rhett, skeptical, chalked it up to a mountain lion's cry, a sound that often tricked the untrained ear into hearing human distress. The day dragged on, sunlight spilling over the peaks, the forest alive with distant bird calls. By late afternoon, he'd finished a meal of instant noodles and canned beans, the metallic tang lingering on his tongue. Stepping outside for air, he leaned on the railing, the wind tugging at his jacket. Something felt off. The rustle of pines was the only sound. No birds, no insects, a silence so thick it pressed against his chest. Through his binoculars, he spotted a faint wisp of smoke rising to the south. Too small for a wildfire, too persistent for a fleeting campfire. His pulse quickened. Protocol said to call it in, but if it was just campers, he'd look foolish. Curiosity won out. He strapped on his boots, grabbed a flashlight and an old hunting knife, its blade nicked from years of use, and descended the steep, uneven trail. The forest enveloped him, pines stretching upward like cathedral spires, their needles carpeting the ground in a soft, fragrant layer. The air was cool, heavy with damp earth and resin, but as he neared the smoke, it shifted, burnt hair, metallic, a stench that stung his nostrils and tightened his throat. After an hour, he reached a small clearing, the smoke source a crude fire pit ringed with ash and embers. Scattered around it were belongings. A sleeping bag torn as if clawed apart, a backpack with its contents. Granola bars, a water bottle, a torn map, spilled across the dirt, and blood. It pooled on the ground, streaked across rocks, fresh enough to glisten in the fading light. Rhett crouched, hand tightening on the knife, his breath shallow as he scanned for tracks. No claw marks, no paw prints, just the blood, deliberate and undisturbed. A low, guttural noise rolled from the trees to his left, a sound that made his stomach lurch. He spun, flashlight beam trembling, and it caught a face, human but barely. The man's skin was pale, streaked with dirt, his clothes shredded rags hanging off a wiry frame. His mouth twisted into something between a snarl and a grin, teeth yellowed and uneven. "Help me?" he rasped, his voice hollow, mocking, as if the words were a cruel jest. Rhett stumbled back, raising the knife. "Stay where you are," he warned, but the man lunged, faster than any human should, tackling him to the ground. The knife slipped from Rhett's grasp as they grappled, the man's hands clamping around his throat, his breath a rancid cloud of rot. Rhett thrashed, vision blurring, until his hand found a rock. He slammed it against the man's head once, twice, breaking free as the attacker stumbled back with a guttural grunt, retreating into the shadows. Heart pounding, Rhett retrieved his knife and flashlight, the beam shaking as he followed a blood trail deeper into the forest. The smell grew stronger, coppery thick, until he found a body. A man, mid-30s, chest torn open, ribs exposed, face frozen in a grimace of agony. The wounds were too precise, almost surgical, not the chaos of a bear attack. A rustling behind him made him whirl, and there stood the pale man, now flanked by two others, disheveled, their faces blank but menacing, eyes glinting in the dark. Rhett didn't wait. He ran, zigzagging through the trees, branches clawing his face, his lungs burning as their unnervingly quiet footsteps pursued. Reaching a ridge, he spotted a narrow crevice in the rock and squeezed inside, pressing himself against the cold stone. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. "He's close," one whispered, voice eerily calm. "I can smell him." Rhett held his breath, knife gripped tight, every muscle tensed as they lingered, minutes stretching into eternity, before retreating. At dawn, he stumbled back to the tower, hands shaking as he locked the hatch and radioed Terry, voice trembling as he recounted the night. Terry promised a ranger by morning, but sleep eluded Rhett, the knife clutched against his chest. When Dale, a grizzled ranger, arrived, they returned to the clearing. The fire pit remained, but the blood and body were gone, the ground swept clean. Dale's skeptical glance stung, but he filed a report. Weeks later, Rhett dug online, uncovering missing persons and mutilated bodies in the Black Hills, linked to Daniel Rohr, a former surgeon turned predator. The evidence was gone, but the memory of that hollow voice lingered. Brennan Connolly's 2017 post at Red Cedar Point in northern Montana mirrored this descent. A wiry man in his late 30s, Brennan had fled small-town monotony for the tower's isolation, perched on a rocky ridge overlooking a green sea of pines. He took pride in spotting smoke, logging wildlife, until he noticed snapped treetops 2 miles out, their brakes too clean for wind or storm. Hugh, the supply runner, chuckled nervously, muttering about wildlife gone wild. But his unease was palpable. That night, heavy thuds echoed through the forest, erratic and deliberate, coming from the snapped trees. Brennan grabbed his flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, and glimpsed a massive figure, hunched, mottled gray skin, limbs too long, legs bent backward like a bird's, shifting between the pines. His pulse raced as he locked the trapdoor, rifle in hand. The creature circled the tower, its rasping exhale a sound the forest itself seemed to groan. Brennan fired twice, the shots echoing, hitting its center mass. It staggered but didn't fall, climbing the ladder with grotesque limbs. More shots struck its shoulder, and it leapt back, landing with a sickening crunch, pacing as if daring him to descend. Minutes stretched into hours, the stench of rot and wet soil seeping through the cracks, until it retreated at dawn. Hugh arrived, pale, and led Brennan to a creek where a deer carcass lay, torso torn open with surgical precision, and a human arm, stripped to bone, rested nearby. Rangers dismissed it as scavengers, But the creature returned, claw marks scarring the tower, its voice mimicking human pleas. "Come down." A flare gun's burst blistered its chest, driving it back into the woods, leaving ash and charred earth by morning. The stalker's gaze. A predator's game. Clyde Mooney, in 2014 in New Mexico's Lincoln National Forest, traded warehouse drudgery for the Pinyon Lookout Tower's solitude. A man in his 40s with a weathered face, he'd endured decades of forklifts and surly supervisors, craving the quiet of sunsets over pines. One afternoon, he spotted movement. A large, oily-sheened creature darting through the underbrush, its color wrong, like asphalt shimmering in heat. He logged it, dismissing it as a shadow trick, until Ranger Jennifer arrived with supplies, her truck's flat tire delaying her. A sharp, guttural bark broke the silence, deeper and wetter than any animal's, and the creature emerged, massive, hairless, its skin taut over muscle, head elongated and canine-like, teeth jagged and uneven. Jennifer fired her Glock, hitting its shoulder, but it barely flinched, letting out a grating noise that rang in Clyde's ears. They scrambled to the truck, its engine roaring as the creature gave chase, its movements fluid yet deliberate. At the tower, it climbed the metal supports, claws screeching against steel, its rancid coppery stench flooding the cabin. Jennifer shot its neck, and it fell with a thud, but by morning, its body was gone, a blood trail leading into the forest. A week later, hikers vanished near the tower, their campsite torn apart, blood splattered, but no bodies found. Only claw marks too wide, too deep. Nolan Mercer's 2019 stint in Arizona's Chuska Mountains began with solitude and dog-eared mystery novels, until a dense plume of smoke drew him out. A burning truck and a campsite in disarray greeted him. Tents shredded, blood streaking the hood, a journal inside a zipped tent detailing a figure watching from the trees. As he turned to leave, a tall, wiry man with a machete stepped from the shadows, his clothes filthy, hands slick with blood. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, voice calm, polite. Nolan fired his Winchester, hitting the man's shoulder, but he lunged again, snarling. Two more figures emerged, ragged, armed with a crowbar and knife. Nolan shot one in the stomach, clubbed another with the rifle butt, and fled as the leader laughed. "You'll regret this." At the tower, they circled, their footsteps quiet but relentless, until a flare gun's burst drove them back, the leader's chest smoking. The next day, the campsite was gone. The journal vanished. Callum Weaver, in 1983 on Washington's Mount Rainier, sought peace after city chaos. His tower overlooked pristine wilderness, but in August, he noticed an elk with a deep gash, its head jerking toward the trees. That night, heavy thuds and scraping woke him, something being dragged across rock. At dawn, he found blood and fur near the tower. An elk's antler snapped clean. The noises escalated, breathing, a low hum, and massive footprints with claw-like toes circled the base. One evening, he glimpsed a tall, gaunt figure, pale, translucent skin stretched over bones, arms dangling past its knees, head wolf-like but wrong. It stalked him back, clawing at the door with jerky movements. Callum struck its arm with a hatchet, and it retreated with a scream. A hiker later found a shredded tent and human bones, but rangers dismissed it. The Hollow's hunger, survival's cost. Everett Kane, in 1987 in Washington's Gifford Pinchot, traded a divorce's wreckage for Tower 7's quiet. A static-filled help over the radio led him to a clearing with a torn backpack and a crude stick arrangement. Circle with an X. A hunched figure with bark-like skin watched, its gaping maw void. Everett fired a flare, illuminating its featureless face, and it recoiled. Back at the tower, it climbed, limbs bending unnaturally, forcing the hatch open. Its torso was skeletal, arms thick, moving with eerie grace. Everett sprayed it with a fire extinguisher and shot a flare into its chest, its scream piercing as it fell. Rangers found blackened earth and scattered bones. Kian Margrave's 1994 post in Idaho Salmon Chalice began with peace, until a scream drew him to a clearing with a cracked flashlight and blood. Barefoot tracks led to a shredded tent and a blood-smeared boot. A creature with mottled skin and elongated limbs watched, its face twisted. Kian fled, but it circled the tower, leaving mangled deer and bones, its grinding noise haunting the nights. It attacked, clawing through the door. Kian's hatchet struck its arm, driving it back. Rangers found the tower trashed but blamed a bear. A missing ranger's boot and blood trail later closed the area. Calvin Reese, in 2017 in Wyoming's Shoshone, followed a rhythmic banging to a logging shack with a strung-up deer carcass and blood-stained gear. Boot prints led to a camp with a notebook of ramblings about cleansing the impure. A gaunt man dragging a body emerged, hammer raised. "You don't belong here," he said. Calvin's axe hit his shoulder, then temple, knocking him out. The man, Everett Marston, was a killer, his camp hiding 7 bodies. His words lingered. "You'll see the forest differently now." Nash Winter's 2017 stint in Oregon's Mount Hood began with a missing hiker report. A buried backpack and blood-stained shirt preceded a figure watching from the trees, a bloody handprint marking the tower's ladder. A bearded man climbed with a grappling hook. Nash struck his hand with a wrench, driving him off. A freshly dug hole revealed remains. Brian Carver, a hunter. Rangers found more graves and a camp with trophies, dubbing him the Hermit Butcher. Never caught. Ethan Keller, in 2018 in Oregon's Deschutes, found a stained tent, then frayed clothes. Footsteps climbed the tower. A man's voice taunted, "Mind if I come up?" He returned with a crowbar, prying the hatch. Ethan hurled a hatchet, missing, and found a severed finger in a bone circle. Fleeing, he discovered a tent with a mutilated body and Polaroids of missing hikers. The man and a woman attacked, setting fire to the tower. Ethan killed them with the hatchet, their camp revealing a history of murder. The evidence endures, a truth too vast. The wilderness harbors a stalker, Wendigo, Hollow Stalker, Shrike, Ravenous Stalker, Ridge Stalker, Ravenmocker, Skeetra, Notch Walker, Pale Stalker, Asgil, Raker. Its name's a litany of dread. Evidence piles like cairns. Bundles of bones, claw marks, shredded tents, blood trails, tracks defying nature. Rangers scoff, bears, exhaustion, but the pattern persists. A tall, gaunt predator, its intelligence a blade honed on fear, its hunger a hollow that consumes. Is it a relic, a spirit, or a nightmare birthed in the wild? Reader, would you climb these towers, trusting your wits against its claws? Or does the first whisper turn you back? Could you face its gaze, or leave its hunger to the shadows? The forbidden excavation unearths this terror, daring you to tread where the woods still watch.